We acknowledge the original owners of the land on which we podcast, whose stories were told for thousands of years. Today, we are recording in Meanjin. We pay our respects to elders past and present who may be listening. Sovereignty was never ceded. A quick note before we get started that there may be some swearing in today's podcast. If you don't like swearing or usually listen with children in the car, you have been warned. This episode of What in the NDIS Now is brought to you by Astalty. Astalty is the software solution for NDIS professionals built by NDIS professionals. Astalty is my go-to software, and Astalty is trusted and loved by hundreds of other NDIS providers. I love how easy it is to use and how it keeps all my participant information, notes, and invoicing all in one place, available to me anytime from any device. Sign up now for your 14-day free trial. Head to astalty.com.au to sign up now. See for yourself how much easier managing all your NDIS business needs are by using Astalty. Thanks again to Astalty for sponsoring today's episode. You're listening to What in the NDIS Now, a podcast where I, Hannah Redford, and my friend Sam Rosenbaum interview participants and providers about all things NDIS. Hey Sam, how are you going?
Yeah, really good, Hannah. How about yourself?
Yeah, I'm doing well.
We've survived post-Cyclone Alfred.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, mostly survived.
Yes.
There was lots of perishables. Mostly survived, yes.
Oh, that's good to know. I did guess you'd survived by the fact that you're here, but...
it's a good sign. It's
yeah.
a strong indicator.
Strong indicator. And I have finally slightly worked out the bus system here in Brisbane.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah.
I do love the good public system up here. I remember you calling me up, though, the other day with a good, I've got fucking so many recommendations for Queensland Transport.
Yes, well, so my 13-year-old's OT actually decided to come with us on the bus route we do most often, which is into the Queensland Children's Hospital, and showed us all the tips and tricks about how to use the Brisbane bus system. So that was amazing and cool and helped a lot, but it is still overly complicated, and I don't know how tourists do it without an OT escort. So anyway...
Well, those pains seem to be the feature of today's podcast. So who have we got on, Hannah?
So today I'm really excited because we have someone who is a journalist and has written about her own experience of her son who has a disability and is on NDIS. And I'm really excited to talk about this and get into some sweariness about the stupid NDIS system. We've got Natasha Sholl. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, we usually start the show with, where did you grow up?
So I grew up exactly where I am now. So I grew up in Melbourne. I have been in Melbourne my entire life with a few stints, just travelling. But yes, haven't gone far.
One that hasn't put in the cuckoo's nest yet.
No, not yet. One day.
Oh, I love Melbourne. So, and both me and Sam used to live there. And even though I've lived in Brisbane for over 7 years now, I still sometimes I'm like, oh, I hate this bit about it. I hate that bit about it. Why is it so hard? Melbourne is so much easier.
It's the coffee shop, the coffee life.
Oh, yeah, it's very coffee centered.
It's just not having the regular, like the coffee shop around the corner that's open from God knows when to God knows what time of the thing, and it's just reliable and I've got good Wi-Fi and great to sit in for like 5 hours. Wasted so
now
much
I
time in my
don't feel
unit.
so bad that I've never left. Thank you.
Yeah. My advice
Probably
is,
reasons why I had to move up.
so our next question is, how did you get into the disability sector?
Not by choice. So we have an amazing 14-year-old son, and when he was 12, his health deteriorated pretty much within hours. Took him to emergency, and he just had a fever for a few days. We thought it was COVID, and we were just sort of saw the GP. She said hydrate, rest. That hydration and rest was not going to cut it, apparently. So we had to rush him to emergency when he just seemed not to be able to walk properly. And within sort of 24 hours, his health deteriorated really rapidly. He was on life support on a ventilator, couldn't breathe on his own, couldn't swallow on his own, couldn't talk, couldn't move any part of his body at all. And it turned out he had Hodgkin's lymphoma. So, which, in theory, people call it the good cancer, which in theory, I guess it has a good, survival rate. But what had happened to him is that it had triggered a really rare event in his body where his body tried to fight the cancer, but instead of just, releasing antibodies, it actually destroyed all his nerves. So bodies are weird things. And he is now in remission from cancer, which is amazing. But obviously that nerve damage is, quite extensive. And he spent a year in hospital at Monash Children's, 6 months in ICU, 6 months in rehab. He's made some strong gains, so he can now breathe on his own, which is amazing. He can talk, he can eat, he can do all those things, but that sort of movement to his body is something that hasn't really come back. So he is essentially quadriplegic, full-time wheelchair user, and we were just thrown into the deep end really quickly, having to sort of adjust to this new world. And he's been home for just over a year now from hospital, so discharged, and we've just made all those adjustments and learning as we go.
Well, that is quite the baptism of fire into
it is.
disability.
We don't do things by halves in our family.
No. I think it's also really different to, someone like me who knew that my baby would have a disability when she was going to pop out. I don't know. She popped out. To when you acquire that later in life, and that sort of, it's to an extent there's some similarities in that, when I gave birth to a child who they knew from the get-go had a disability, they just kind of give you the baby and go, well, have fun with that. And, I'm sure that, once he was able to get home, it was a bit like, all right, see you later.
Yeah, it was like,
let's
save his life, have fun. It was very extreme. And although all the everyone at the hospital did the best they could to prepare us for discharge, and everyone is amazing, I think the reality of having a life that's been imploded and has been completely turned upside down, and the responsibilities that come with that, and also the grief as well for the life that we thought, that we were just entitled to, and that we would just keep plugging along every day. And to have that sort of spun on its head. Ezra has 3 younger siblings as well. He is an amazing big brother, has always been and continues to be, but all the dynamics of that completely shift. My husband and I went from being really busy parents, working and raising 4 children, to primary caregivers, which is a completely different shift. His siblings went from being the little siblings to then also not having as much attention from us as parents, so our dynamic changed, to really worrying about their big brothers, to becoming also caregivers as well, which is a dynamic they are amazing at, but not one that their older brother wanted. He wanted to be the big brother taking care of them, and that still exists, but obviously those relationships change. So even just forgetting all the really big things like the day-to-day, how to manage things which are enormous, it's just those little shifts as well that are really draining.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I really feel that because I've got 3, not 4, and I know that our middle child, who doesn't have as severe stuff going on as the eldest and the youngest, has gotten far less attention than a normal middle child would miss out on, potentially. And I often think about her and the impact that has on her, and that, you know, we get all this lovely funding for our kids with disabilities. I mean, obviously not enough, but great. And then there's just nothing for this other child that is that young carer and is doing this amazing work, and is left kind of going, well, what about me?
Yeah.
It's so hard.
No, it's a very complex thing to manage, not just the disability itself, but the sort of flow and effect of what that means for everybody else. And just, you know, putting it out there, obviously no one works harder than our son who has a disability. He is unbelievable, everything he manages each day. So there's no comparison for what he goes through and how he manages things. And his attitude is just like next level. He sets the tone for the house, and it's, you know, it's funny and it's fun and it's ridiculous, and we sort of lean into the absurdity of everything that's going on. But yeah, there is that flow and effect for everyone else involved.
Yeah, I saw your piece in The Guardian that was all about him and his initial difficulty of getting on the NDIS.
Oh my
and
God.
How, you know, he's quadriplegic and yet it took you 3 times to get accepted. And that blows my mind.
And I think it just highlights the way that the NDIS sort of functions in this sort of ticker box approach. And he didn't fit into any box. He had a really rare illness, and the way that it progressed is probably not the norm. So they just looked at his diagnosis and went, he's not disabled. And it's like, that's cool. Could you tell his body that? That would be great. Thanks. And, you know, it's not like we just filled out a form. We had, like, you know, paperwork from the hospital, from all his doctors, from all his specialists. And it's like, did they even read anything? Because I think they just looked at the diagnosis, crossed it off, and all, like, if you really want it, you'll fight for it. And I think that's the way that the NDIS is set up. It's set up so that people constantly have to fight for things, and they think that if you're exhausted enough, then you must not need it, and therefore you'll stop fighting. And it shouldn't be that way. We've got doctors, physios, OTs supporting his application. They're not doing that for fun. They're very busy. That's not what they want to be doing. That's not where their resources should be going. If they're making the effort to fill out this form and say, this child needs support from NDIS, there's a reason for that. Like, no one is here for fun. And I don't know why anyone would then reject a claim by professionals. I'm not a professional. I'm not a doctor, but I am his parent and caregiver. And so I don't know why we're being put through this process that then just exhausts all these resources and has to put pressure and then the hospital system again to then keep reapplying and reapplying.
You're 100% right, because it's been highlighted very recently for the Senate estimates, with the CEO coming up and pretty much going that they spend 15 minutes reading these reports.
Yeah.
You've got to spend the countless hours on top of those professionals' time and taxpayers' money, and maybe you've got an NDIS plan at the moment that some of that money might go towards some of these reports, but if you don't, it's quite an expensive burden. And also, if you're not from that, if you're not from that sort of space, as you've said, it's new, it's hard, and it's complex.
And just the inefficiency of it. Like, if they, instead of spending 5 minutes, 15 minutes or not reading a report, if they just spent the time to read that report, it would reduce the workload on the NDIS and everyone else obviously down the track. So it's just the inefficiency of it, which is so frustrating. And it got to the point where I think it was the third application, the doctor said, please don't read the report we've written about Ezra. It's not in your interests to read it, because we've had to make it very, worst case scenario extreme and really go into how bad things are. And of course I read it because I'm a masochist, but, as a caregiver, as a parent, the trauma of that process was so awful and dehumanizing and demoralizing and traumatic. And that's what the system does to people. It looks at someone like Ezra and says, instead of saying, how can we support this kid so that he can live the best life possible, it forces you to say, look how bad things are, look how terrible things are, look at all these worst case scenarios. And I was not in a good headspace then, where we'd been in the hospital system for a year trying to juggle everything. And then just to read this report and the words that were on the paper and the way that they forced us to be in that position of re-traumatizing us. And it was just awful. It was an awful experience for everybody.
Absolutely. And that's why I often, when I was a support coordinator, I'd tell people, please do not read this. You have, like you say, you have every right to read this report. It's about you, but it's not for you. It is for the NDIS. It is for those paper pushers. And it is not really in your interest to read this report, because the devastation of seeing it written in black and white.
Yeah, it's awful.
It is. So I also wanted to ask you, you've talked a little bit about also the hilarity of it all. And one of the things that Sam loved is your Post-it notes, and sometimes you draw a cock and balls on them for people who
Don't we all need to just draw a cock and ball sometimes?
For people parked in the disability parking spot. So do you still have those Sharpie and Post-it notes?
I do. I take them everywhere with me. And then, when we're driving, if we're needing a wheelchair accessible spot, if we see a car parked, the kids are like on the edge of their seat. They're like, oh, do they have a permit? Sometimes it's like, I hope they don't have a permit so we can see mum go off. And then sometimes it's like, oh my God, how embarrassing. I hope they have a permit. But no, I think life is so intense and stressful that we just have to find our own way to advocate for ourselves in a way that feels authentic and true to us. And sometimes that just means leaving a really passive-aggressive or aggressive-aggressive note on someone's car who has made the world less accessible for families like ours who have a right to park in disabled spots, who rely on those spots so that we can safely take Ezra out of the car. And if we work so hard each day to be able to get out of the house, and then you've got someone with this privilege or entitlement who's just thought, I'll just park in a wheelchair spot, it's fine, no one needs it. And it's that lack of visibility, that lack of people understanding what we go through each day. So it's not just the parking spot. It's not just that they've taken a parking spot. It's that they've said, I don't care about you or your family. I don't care that I'm reducing access for you. I don't even see disability. And so, yeah, we draw a cock and balls. It's what we do.
It's really embodying that old, if you don't laugh, you cry.
Exactly.
Yeah. And who wants to cry?
Sometimes you do both at the same time.
Well,
we mix it up.
As long as there's still some laughter in there, at least. I think is definitely the way that I got myself through a lot of the shit fight with my mum. And
exactly.
Those, especially when the system where it goes, we're doing this so you can design your own sort of way life and have what you need, and then it's just the challenge after challenge, and then the system that doesn't understand its own self half the time. And I don't know if this is a privilege, but I've had the experience where I've had exposure to this from day one. I couldn't imagine having to do some of this without that, I guess, in a way. But I don't know. It's system's fucked.
Yeah.
But I really do. We'll put the link for this for the post, The Guardian, for your article that we've been talking about here, because it is really great, especially where you sort of go. Also, where you're talking about Ezra and how the public's perception and the impact and the changes you have seen is really kind of pivotal as well. And I think that's encapsulated part of what was really the big focus out of the Disability and Aged Care Royal Commission is the public perception and acceptance. And I love where you go to people, where you sort of quote, where you've quoted, do people know that they can just not talk to me rather than be condescending? And also having to explain the concepts of disability porn.
Yeah. Well, it's just, and because it's so constant, like he's just always been, like since the day he was born, he was an old soul. He's just always been really switched on and mature. So the way he deals with things is, he's just got this sort of awareness. And, luckily, as you say, he can laugh at things. Like people will look at him and then look at me and ask questions. Like we're in the park the other day with the dogs. And so this woman said to me, "Oh, does he respond well to the dogs?" And I'm like, we just looked at each other and he was like, "Yeah." It was just such an odd thing. Like he's in a wheelchair, but he's like a human being, and just talk to him or say nothing. Like literally you don't have to talk to us at all. I would love that. Or people are just like, "Oh, I love your wheelchair. It's a great colour." And it's like, dude, he's a 14-year-old kid. Stop talking to him like he's 3. And so it gives us good material because we laugh at it for a few days afterwards. But then there are other days where he's not in the mood for that, where he doesn't have that thick skin, where we're all just exhausted, and it really gets to him and it gets to us. So, usually we can laugh about it, but it's constant. It's everywhere we go. And, it's just that reminder of, in his head, he's a regular teenage boy, and he is a regular teenage boy, but the perception of him is not that. And I think that discrepancy between what he wants from life and how he's feeling and how the public perceives him and the public's expectations of him, when that doesn't match up, it can be really difficult.
Yeah, it's my as I was just sort of saying that, the intrusive thought that my mother would have go through her head would be to turn around and start barking at the dog.
I'll suggest that next time. You probably would do that.
Please feedback. I want to know that experience.
How does he go at school? Does he go to the same school?
Yeah, so his school have been unbelievable, and I think that is an example of when people do their jobs properly, which I think is part of my frustration with the NDIS, or where things have gone wrong. It's like, I don't need anyone to do us any favours. I just need people to do their jobs. And the school has been an example of not only have they done their jobs, but they've gone above and beyond. And the impact on Ezra's life and on our life because of that has been incredible. So they basically from day one said, we have no idea how this will go. But we are committed to making this work. We've never had a child in Ezra's. They've dealt with lots of different kids with different disabilities or different needs, but we've never had a kid like Ezra at school. And he was a fairly new student. We'd moved there. He'd only gone to the school for a year before this all happened. And so they were committed to making it work. They knew his personality, that he was a hard worker. He's really smart, really switched on, really social. So they knew, that they owed it to him to make this work for him. They have changed wherever his classrooms are. They make sure everything's accessible. They were in the middle of a renovation actually just before he came back to school, and they had the OT and the physio come in and say, right, how can we make this, everything better for him? If we're doing this renovation anyway, you get a say to make sure we're doing this correctly, which is, amazing. His teachers, the students, the team around him are just there to make sure that he is there to learn and have fun, and his social emotional well-being is really taken care of. They adjust his timetable. So everything is set up for his success, and he has, achieved that and more. He's sort of top of his English class, top of his math class, loving media, loving science, like just really so happy at school. He's there part-time, but it's sort of that routine of his week, that ability to just be a regular kid in a regular school, worrying about regular things and not worrying about all the big things that he has to outside of that zone. You know, it's life-changing for him and for us. And the best bit for me is I get to be a parent. I'm not a caregiver. I'm not there with him. He's got other people there to take care of his needs. He's got teachers teaching him. And I get to just be a parent. I get to pick him up and he can say, I got, you know, this mark in my maths test. I got this mark in my English test. This happened at recess today. It's just normal, ordinary things. And when you're doing other things like fighting with the NDIS, you know, my ability to parent has been taken away from me because I then become a caregiver, I become an advocate, I become exhausted. Whereas when you are in a different environment, when people are like, nah, this is our job, we'll take care of it, you just go be a parent, it gives you back that independence and that just ordinary life that's, you know, lacking in so many other areas.
Yeah, which reminds me of the part of the article where you talk about needing a modification of your car.
Oh my gosh. We're in the middle of that now, so just let me just stretch a little bit so I can get going.
Because you're talking about people just doing their job and
Just
the
do your
effect, the
job.
positive effect when the whole system actually does its job to remove the inefficiencies. And this is exactly where my next question was going to end up if you didn't jump in first. Because it ties in quite nicely of what the reverse looks like of what everything, when things are going well.
Yeah, exactly. So Ezra is in a wheelchair, so I think logic would say that we need a wheelchair accessible car. And the NDIS, it's like it just is so broken that the way that we have to fight for all this, so we've got OTs, we've got doctors, we've got physios doing these applications. The wait list is so long, I think partly because of COVID delays, car delays. So, you know, there's a whole sort of backlog of people waiting in the system, but also NDIS delays. So I remember leaving hospital and thinking, okay, so we'll get this sorted. And someone said there's a 2-year wait. And I just couldn't understand how that could be possible. And then obviously we were thrust in the system and was like, okay, now I get how this is possible. So it was only because of that Guardian essay and because of writing to our local MP, who then wrote to Bill Shorten, who was obviously minister at the time, that magically, after all that happened, our car modification request got approved within 24 hours. And that just should not be the case. It shouldn't take someone who writes an article in a newspaper and writes to your local MP to get a decision made, because think about how many decisions we need made by how many people in Australia every single day. That should not be the process. And the fact that it could be made then within 24 hours just shows, wow, something's broken. And then they looked at our history and it got lost in the system so many times that we actually needed a new application. It had been so long that the one that we'd applied for had, expired. So we needed to do the whole process again. And then they just were not approving things that were just so logical. So then they said, well, we're not going to approve, we needed some seats put into the back. They said, we're not going to approve that, which is a really minimal cost in the grand scheme of things. And I said, well, how would you like us to take Ezra and his brothers to school? Like we do need to fit everybody in the car. And like just these logical things. They're like, oh, okay, fine, we'll approve it. Just at a bare minimum, we would just like our immediate family members to be able to fit in a family car. I don't think that's too much to ask, and there's no reason to sort of reject that. And then there's another thing called a docking station so that Ezra can be put into the car and we're not bending and twisting to put him in with the sort of manual restraints and everything to the wheelchair. And they rejected that. And I think at a minimum, their reasoning for rejecting that is that if you have manual handling training and you're doing it properly, you shouldn't hurt your back. Now, I'm not sure if please come to my home and tell me what I'm doing wrong, but I hurt myself multiple times a week. We have to hoist Ezra in and out of bed. We have to sort of do a lot of things for him. He's sort of a giant man-sized 14-year-old. He's so tall. Just us doing things every day is a burden on our bodies, and we need to be able to take care of him for his sake. So it's all about him. I don't care what happens to my body, but I need to be able to take care of him to give him the best quality of life. And if you're using a hoist multiple times a day, if you're getting in and out of the car multiple times a day, the strain on your body and the risk of burnout is extreme. Then you add into that my, husband has had back surgery in the past. He's under strict medical instructions not to be doing this sort of constant bending. And so it's logical that we need this thing. There's no one scamming the system to say, you know what would be fun? I'm going to scam the NDIS so I can get a docking station for my car. I didn't even know what a docking station was 2 years ago. Like, why would I be putting in this application to get part of a car for, wheelchair accessibility just for fun? Like, no one's doing this for fun. But again, that's now delayed our application. Still waiting on a response. The person who originally handed our file was like, I don't take care of it anymore. The original sort of rush to get us help because there was sort of media visibility through, the MP, that's gone. And so they don't care anymore. We've now gone back to the bottom of the system. Like, there's just no consistency, no efficiency. So we're just reapplying. I'm constantly emailing, constantly trying to get in touch with anybody who will even respond to my email to say, yes, we've received your application. We've had to go back to get more medical certificates, from my husband's neurosurgeon to say, yes, he's had a back operation, more support from our physios, more support from our OTs to get a docking station so that our son can get in the car safely. So it's just this constant need for advocating and fighting for every little thing. And I think it's just so dehumanizing because they come from a position of, we don't trust you, we don't believe you. And, I think so often I come from this place of extreme privilege. I have a legal background, so advocacy should come naturally to me. English is my first language, so working through all these systems should come easily to me. I was born in Australia, so again, the systems should be familiar to me. With all, and I don't have a disability. So things like accessibility, I can use my computer without using voice control like Ezra would. I'm completely able-bodied. So all these things, in theory, I'm at a level of privilege that other people may not be, and I'm completely not coping. I do not understand when I get all this sort of information thrown at me. I struggle to sort of advocate because there's just no consistency in the system. Sometimes I'm given stuff and I'm like, I don't even understand this at all. I'm completely burnt out, completely overloaded. And I just think if I had any, there will come a time when Ezra will be advocating for himself. And I just think, I don't know, I'm not managing, I'm not coping. The burden that this is putting on people and the impact on mental health, on physical health is so extreme, and there's just no responsibility taken for that. The number of times where I've just been, crying in a corner somewhere and then had to sort of take a deep breath, pick myself up and go on with my day. And that is a direct cause of the way that I have been treated, that Ezra has been treated, that our family has been treated by the NDIS, and there's no accountability. And I just think people who are just being completely devastated by this system, like, there's just no accountability, and there should be. And, we are so grateful for the funding that we get. We couldn't survive without that funding, but the way it makes us fight for every single little bit of it is just, I think it's just shameful.
You have articulated that perfectly. That is exactly how I often feel, and am just at a loss of how do other people who don't have the privilege I have work this system, because I'm not able to work this system. And I think a lot of those inconsistencies come from the lack of training of planners. Mm-hmm. What you get is that every single person you speak to has a slightly different understanding of the act, of what their role is, of processes. And in the end, you have such vastly different decisions because actually nobody knows what they're doing.
Correct.
And that's one part of it. But also, I do think it's deliberate. I think that they purposely make it impossible so that, like you said, we do give up, or so that we are just grateful for whatever tiny bit we get.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so dehumanizing. It's so demoralizing because it forces you into this position of being so, grateful for the breadcrumbs that you're thrown, rather than saying, actually, I'm owed this and I'm deserved this and my son deserves better. And we're actually not asking for much. We're just asking for the bare necessities so that he can function in the world. The rest is up to him. Like he works so hard, but he needs the basics in order to survive and to thrive. And they're basically just dangling this carrot, and you're just constantly having to sort of lurch forward and beg. And I don't want to beg. Like, I just want to live my life. He just wants to live his life. And it sets it up so that you do fail, and so that you do have to beg, you sort of grovel. And it's like, just spend, one day, half a day in our life, and you'll see how much these sort of bare necessities are required. And just, have some compassion and some empathy. And again, just do your job. Like, that's all.
Just do your job.
The rest is up to us, and that's fine. We will work so hard for Ezra, and Ezra works so hard, and that's fine. Like, that is our responsibility to take care of him. It's his responsibility to do what he needs to do. And it is not fair that, the cards that we've been dealt are not fair, but we're not here to get pity. We're not asking for anything extra. The rest we'll deal with. Like, that's on us, and we get that. And we are an amazing family. We work together well. We're an amazing team, but we just need, the basics put in place. So, even the fact that his wheelchair, we had to get through the Steve Waugh Foundation, which is amazing, because he wasn't on the NDIS yet. Things like that, where they were like, we shouldn't have to fight for a wheelchair for a kid who's quadriplegic. Like, it's just the lack of logic is just staggering. And so you're sort of constantly going through these fights, and it's just where you think that there are sort of rules in place or boundaries in place or laws in place that are there to exist to help you. And then you realize, no, this isn't here to help me. This is actually, it creates barriers to getting help. It creates more burden on us as carers, on Ezra as someone living with a disability, and it makes life harder, not easier. And I think that's the really difficult part.
Yeah, and then you see the waste because you've had to hire a car in the meantime.
Correct.
That the NDIS are paying for.
Correct.
And it would have been cheaper if they just paid for the car modifications and the docking station at the beginning. And
correct. Yeah, it's just, I get that there have to be processes and procedures. That's totally fine, but it would just be helpful if those processes and procedures made sense, and that if they stuck to them, because we're doing our bit, if they could just do their bit is all we ask for.
Well,
and it's
the flow on overlap within not just the NDIS, but when we're talking about the other mainstream areas, it's just having that connection to ensuring that everything is accessible from the get-go. If it's housing or if it's health and the health and hospital sort of sector, just making sure that from the get-go, or the education system, that the floor, everything has, the entrances are at wheelchair accessible from the planning point, because you said planning to fail. The start of this failure to plan is planning to fail. And what you're sort of embedding is that there are really good points that are working here when they work for you, and it's encapsulating what it's meant to do. It's just that all the other systems that you're having to, and hoops that you're having to jump through, have kind of missed the memo that things are meant to be a little bit more accessible, and then we wouldn't have this huge, massive waste that the whole of government is ramping on about. Look, there will be still some of the points that they're making, but a lot less in the...
Correct. If they do their jobs properly, the flow-on effect is that there's less waste of resources. Everyone else can do their jobs properly. We don't have our OTs and physios scrambling to write more reports. They can actually, do some hands-on physio work with Ezra rather than, spending all their time report writing and advocating. And it's that overlapping of wastage. There was someone who said to me, "Oh, you're not even meant to have a hire car. It's actually not part of most people. It gets rejected. So just make sure you don't draw attention to that." And it's like, well, that's terrible. Like, what did they think we were going to do in the meantime? Like, there was no way for our family to function without that because of Ezra's condition. And there are these things where heaps of families, again, it's that privilege of things that we have that were accepted, other families have had rejected. And why? Where is that consistency? Someone else might have had an application for a wheelchair accessible car that was accepted straight away, and ours has been lost in the system somewhere. So it's just that lack of consistency and failing to meet expectations. And it's really disappointing. And
I think that last point has encapsulated every support coordinator's frustration with the system since day one.
Yeah, exactly.
But that probably leads us to our sort of last question, which is, in your ideal world, what would the NDIS look like?
I think the NDIS should be, and it's just shocking that it's not, set up to support people living with a disability. I mean, that is why it should exist. So it should come from a place of actually providing that support. It should come from a place of believing people. It should come from a place of wanting to make the world a more accessible place, and to set it up, to set us all up from a position of success. So less wastage of resources, more empathy, more compassion, more professionalism, really, and just to function like any other business would or should. So accountability, really streamlined processes, really clear communication, taking that burden off healthcare providers, off families, off people living with a disability, to really make decisions that make sense, to be efficient, to save money, to save resources, to funnel those funds into things that could be utilised better. I mean, we have a quite big funding plan because of Ezra's needs, and the way that we've just seen so much of those funds be sucked into areas that they shouldn't be, it's shocking. So, I think it just needs to be a system that exists to support people and not to create barriers to obtaining support.
I think that was highlighted recently when they released how much they are spending on the lawyers when you're at AAT. Did you see this? Because it is a shocking amount. And you just know that if the NDIS had just given people the support that they wanted in the first place, the amount that the Commonwealth is paying to these lawyers, it blows my mind. It doesn't make sense. Like, it would be just cheaper to give people the funding that they need than to pay these lawyers.
It's so rage-inducing, like it's so frustrating because it just objectively makes no sense. There are some decisions that are made that maybe I disagree with, but I say, okay, I see why they're making that decision, or I see why they're fighting that, or I see why they have to put some rules in place. But, the lack of logic and forward thinking, it's just mind-boggling.
Exactly. And I think part of what you were saying about you have all this privilege, and then if you ever had to go, or I don't know, you might have already, but if you had to go to AAT, you have an advantage over, lots of people because you have that law background. And so you have some understanding about how even the statement of issue, what it is and how it's set out and how to read it, because that's something that blew my mind the first time I had a participant go to AAT, and I was like, oh my God, I don't even know how to read this.
Yeah. And again, it's setting people up for failure. It's saying we have power and we're going to use that power, rather than saying we exist to help you. How can we help you? Nobody wants any favors. You just want access to healthcare, access, to basic things that you need to live to survive each day. And yeah, they're just wielding this power over you just because they can. And because there's that wastage of funds, because there's that lack of efficiency, it's clear they're not doing it, for the reasons that they're saying they're doing it. If it was really about funding or, efficiency of processes or, sticking to the rules, then fine, that would be fine. That would make sense. But there's no logic, there's no processes, there's complete wastage of money. And it's, I often think, there are times where we've just been completely overwhelmed by the system. And I just think often, how is this impacting people's lives in a really extreme way? I think the mental health flow and effect for when the NDIS might reject a claim, or the amount of work that they require people to do to fight for basic living standards, I just think I would be shocked if they haven't led to some really severe health outcomes. I would be shocked if it hasn't cost people their lives, if it hasn't cost people their mental health, their standard of living, their quality of living, and the NDIS is responsible for that. There is a direct correlation. I know, even with all the privilege I have and the support that we have, there are times where things are completely unmanageable. And I just think, how many people has this system killed? I'm saying that like in a really serious way. I think they have a responsibility where they have probably rejected things that people need to survive, the amount of work that they require from people. And I know the effect that that's had on my mental health. And I'm often thinking, how has this system been directly responsible for some really negative outcomes, health outcomes, mental health outcomes?
Feel like that might be the headline for your next article or published piece right there. And I'm happy to help with some research on that.
Yeah.
I feel like the three of us could literally continue on this conversation for the next indefinite sort of process. But I just want to sort of look at saying thank you so much for coming on, giving us, walking us through your experience, and especially your trials and some of those good things as well with Ezra, and drawing cock and balls and post-it notes and shoving on people's windscreens. I appreciate that.
We should all be carrying post-its and Sharpies at all times. And not just on cars, maybe we should just put on people as well.
Yeah. Could you imagine that? Like having a journalist or like a presser down just walking up to like one of the two leaders at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. No, thank you so much for having me and for letting me vent.
No, we really do appreciate the experience and the raw perspective and the challenges, and it's just being able to also see it, because Hannah and I sort of have been exposed to this from longer than we would like to admit that we needed to be. So it's having that different perspective of being thrown in the deep fire, in the deep pan, and
Well, thank you for having me.
And thank you so much. Bye.
Huzzah!
Thank you for listening. Please share with people you know. Until next time, as the Green Brothers say, don't forget to be awesome.